We all love a good story, right? One with a clear beginning, a tense middle, and an ending that just clicks. But what about the stories that don't have an ending? The ones that just stop, leaving us with questions that literally echo for decades. Today, we're diving into the really unsettling, but also fascinating world of unsolved cases, the stories that just refuse to be finished.
It's a question that really gets under your skin, doesn't it? When there's no justice, when the truth just stays buried, what are we left with? It's so much more than just a dusty file in a cabinet. It's like a loose thread in our sense of how things should be, a mystery that just hangs in the air, sometimes for generations.
So, we're going to start with a case that began not in some dark alley, but in the quiet suburbs of Noida, India. A horrible tragedy that happened behind the closed doors of a totally normal family home and then just spiraled into one of the most confusing and talked about mysteries in the country's history. Okay, so look at how quickly this whole thing just fell apart. On May 16th, the police thought they had it figured out. A clear theory. The missing servant, Hemraj, he was the killer. Simple, right? Well, less than 24 hours later, that entire theory is just blown to pieces. They find his body on the roof. And just like that, you don't have a prime suspect anymore. You have a second victim. Think about this for a second. It's the classic locked room mystery, but this was real life. Two people are dead inside an apartment that's locked from the inside, with zero signs of a break-in. The investigation became this total maze of conflicting evidence, theories changing by the day, and just a massive media frenzy. It was one of those stories where every so-called answer just led to 10 more questions, leaving a family and, honestly, an entire nation with no closure at all.
Now, you'd think, right? If the victim is famous, the pressure is on, the resources are endless, the case gets solved fast. But as we're about to see, sometimes fame doesn't bring any clarity. In fact, it can just make the whole thing even murkier.
I mean, take the case of Amar Singh Chimkila, a huge musical superstar in Punjab. Back in 1988, he and his wife were shot and killed in broad daylight. Theories were flying everywhere. Was it militants, a professional rival, something personal? But even with all his fame, no one was ever convicted. Or you can go back even further, to 1944, and the murder of a journalist named Lakshmi Kanthan. This case dragged in some of the biggest names in the film industry. But after a huge trial, everyone was acquitted, and the truth was just lost. In both situations, it's like the spotlight created more shadows than light.
And this right here, this is another huge reason cases go cold. You end up with two completely different stories. In 2007, Rizwanur Rahman was found dead. The official report, probably a suicide. But his family? They said no way. They were convinced he was murdered over his marriage, which his wife's powerful family was dead set against. So when you have two narratives that are polar opposites, and you can't definitively prove either one, the case just grinds to a halt. It gets stuck.
All right, let's shift gears to a different kind of mystery, one that's maybe even more terrifying. We've been talking about cases with a circle of people, where the question is, who did it? But what happens when the killer is a total phantom? Just a faceless shadow who terrorizes a city and then vanishes, like they were never there. 13. And that's just the official count of victims of a killer the newspapers called the Stone Man. For months back in 1989, the homeless people of Calcutta, now Calcutta, lived in absolute terror. People were being bludgeoned to death with a huge stone, usually while they were asleep on the pavement. The entire city was just paralyzed with fear. And this is the part that is just so chilling. There was no motive, no connection between the victims, other than the fact that they were vulnerable. The police had absolutely nothing. No leads, no suspects, no witnesses. It was literally like they were hunting a ghost. And then, just as suddenly as the killing started, they stopped. The Stone Man was gone, leaving behind nothing but fear and a giant permanent question mark. So we've seen a few different kinds of these impossible cases, but what's the common thread? Why does some investigations start with so much intensity and then just fizzle out into a permanent mystery? Well, a lot of the time, the answer lies in those first few hours. And believe me, this isn't a problem that's unique to any one country. The infamous murder of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey in the US is a textbook example of this. As you can see, those first 24 hours were a complete disaster. The crime scene wasn't secured, so people were walking all through it, potentially contaminating everything. And that initial mishandling creates problems that you can never, ever fix. It makes finding the truth, even decades later, almost impossible. And this is what these cases turn into, a cold case. Now, it's not closed forever. It's more like it's in a state of suspended animation, just a file sitting on a shelf, waiting for that one crucial piece of new information, a new DNA match, a witness who finally decides to talk, that could suddenly bring the whole thing back to life.
So, why do these stories have such a powerful grip on us? I mean, from true crime documentaries to endless internet forums, we are completely captivated by these unresolved stories. Why do we keep coming back to them even when we know there's no ending?
I think this quote really nails it. As people, we're just wired for stories, and a story needs a resolution. We crave it. An unsolved case feels like a book with the last page ripped out. It just leaves this void, and our minds just can't help it. We instinctively try to fill it in, to guess, to search for that ending that we were denied.
But on a deeper level, these mysteries are so unsettling because they just mess with our fundamental belief in how the world is supposed to work. We want to believe that there's order, right? That wrongdoing gets punished and that the truth always comes out in the end. Unsolved cases are this stark, uncomfortable reminder that sometimes it doesn't. And that's a profoundly disturbing thought. And for every famous case that we've talked about, you have to remember, there are thousands of others that never made the news. They're the personal tragedies of families who are just left in a permanent state of not knowing. Behind every single one of those cold case files, there is a human story. And the question that just hangs there is, how many of those stories are still out there, waiting for their final chapter?